One by one, territories joined together, creating a patchwork nation of 50 different states, united, but each with its own history, spirit, culture, and landmarks. Let's explore the history of 5 of them. Virginia, Ohio, Idaho, Alabama, and North Dakota. Welcome to the States. The first state is called the Mother of Presidents, claiming more than any other state. That's 8 and counting, including 7 of the first 12. It's also known as the Mother of States. Why? Because its early boundaries included parts of Kentucky, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. Greetings from the Commonwealth of Virginia, the oldest of the original 13 colonies. On June 25, 1788, it became the 10th state to join the Union. With 7.6 million residents, it ranks 12th in population.
I'm coming from the southern part of Virginia. There's two different parts of Virginia. There's Northern Virginia, which is not the South. It's all suburbs of Washington, D.C. Southern Virginia tends to be more farming community, more factory workers. They believe in God and country and red, white, and blue.
Virginia took its name from Queen Elizabeth I, also known as the Virgin Queen. But in a bit of historic irony, the well-known slogan, "Virginia is for lovers," has become part of America's lexicon. Invented by a marketing firm in 1969, it initially read, "Virginia is for history lovers." And for good reason.
No matter where you grow up in the United States, when you study American history, you study to a great extent Virginia history. It is a key component of the American experience. And in a sense, that's what makes Virginia history so very special, so rich and interesting.
We like to note that 3 major leaders were here, including Washington, who we consider the sword of the Revolution, Thomas Jefferson, the pen of the Revolution, and Patrick Henry, the voice of the Revolution.
Henry's most famous speech was delivered in 1775 at St. John's Church in Richmond. With courage and elegance, he cried, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death."
3 weeks before the lanterns were hung in Old North Church, Mr. Henry made his liberty or death speech right here.
Henry's leadership did not end once the Revolution was won. He also served 5 terms as the first governor of the state. As for presidents, 8 have come from Virginia. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Woodrow Wilson.
I'm very proud of the presidents that came. They're our forefathers, you know. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. These are brilliant, brilliant people.
Aside from all the presidents, Virginia distinguishes itself in other ways. For starters, it doesn't even claim to be a state.
That's correct. Virginia is not a state. Virginia is actually a commonwealth. We're one of only 4 of the 50 states that are actually commonwealths.
I'm quite fond of that. I don't like to be called a state. I got the seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia tattooed on my leg.
Really, there's no difference in modern terms between a state and a commonwealth, but it's a term going back to the colonial period, the commonweal. Those in governing authority are looking at the wealth of the common people as their special charge.
Today, Virginia is probably best known for its history. And yet, in the past, Virginia was best known for its natural beauty and its natural wonders. In the 1780s, Thomas Jefferson wrote a book, in fact, it's the only book he ever wrote, called Notes on the State of Virginia. And if you look at that, you realize that Virginia was world famous in the 1700s and in the 1800s for its natural wonders. These were world-famous attractions before anyone knew about Yosemite or Yellowstone.
The first Englishmen to gaze upon the wonders of Virginia were fortune hunters, whose purpose was to make a profit for themselves and the Virginia Company of London. On Jamestown Island, they established the first permanent English settlement in the New World, a full 13 years before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. But these early colonists were hardly Virginia's first residents.
The English realized that they were coming into an area where there was a substantial native population. What they didn't think of was the fact that the Indians had a well-developed culture of their own.
And of course, they brought over English ideas about government, about law, about the ownership of property, which the Indians, for example, considered that all land was just something that was sort of held communally for the benefit of the community.
The land was certainly good to the English community, as they successfully planted tobacco and other crops. The desire for more territory increased, along with the population. By the 1670s, Jamestown Colony had some 35,000 residents, but with the newcomers pushing further and further into the wilderness, conflict with the natives seemed inevitable.
The tributary Indians dealt with all this rather well, but as they were pressed back toward the falls of the major rivers, they encountered hostile, stronger, warlike tribes, Susquehannocks, Iroquois, that lived in the interior of the continent.
Escalating tensions with the Indians sparked political discord in the colony. Two pivotal characters emerged: Sir William Berkeley, Jamestown's royal governor, and his cousin by marriage, a young man who wanted to exterminate the native population. His name was Nathaniel Bacon, and he's best remembered as the instigator of events now known as Bacon's Rebellion.
Small farmers who ran outlying plantations and farms felt that the governor and his group in Jamestown were not taking care of them, were not protecting them. And so Bacon led a group that were feeling these grievances against the governor.
What little land was left to the Indians at that point, these poor whites wanted to seize it. And they wanted kind of a government sanction to do that. And Governor Berkeley wouldn't give it to them. And so they initiated wars on their own against the Indians.
Bacon led two preemptive expeditions against the tribes. While he became a hero to many colonists, he couldn't get the governor's support. Ultimately, Bacon's men took control of Jamestown itself and then tried to destroy it.
And they literally put the town to the torch. They went from building to building, setting them ablaze. In fact, some of Bacon's followers burnt their own houses that they owned here on the island, and they even set fire to the State House and the church.
Bacon even wrote a document he called a Declaration of the People, leading some to suggest that his rebellion was, in fact, the first American Revolution.
Bacon and his men actually took a pledge to defy the Crown of England as well as the royal governor. And so when the word reached London, London sent troops. By the time the troops got to Virginia, Bacon was dead and gone. The rebellion was over, but the troops stayed.
Bacon's rebellion began a legacy that saw Virginia at the forefront of America's most pivotal moments. In 1781, the last great battle of the Revolution was fought just 25 miles from Jamestown on the Yorktown Peninsula. Some 80 years later, the Civil War left Virginia's soil soaked with the blood of Americans fighting Americans. With the Confederate capital Richmond just 90 miles from Washington, the state saw more major battles than anywhere else.
The land between Richmond and Washington became the bloodiest ground in the Western Hemisphere. There's nothing equivalent to it in terms of the battles, the skirmishes, the civilian population being caught in the middle of the war.
Given its role in the nation's early military history, it seems only fitting that Virginia is also home to the symbol of America's more recent military exploits, the Pentagon. In the summer of 1941, the possibility of the U.S. entering World War II was becoming increasingly real. So, U.S. leaders turned their attention to the 24,000 War Department employees spread out in 17 buildings around Washington. an inefficient arrangement that wasted time and money. Army General Brian Somervell was appointed to tackle the problem. On a Thursday evening, he pulled together a team of his top engineers and architects. First, Somervell told them the new building had to be located somewhere in Arlington, Virginia, because of its proximity to the capital. Then he dropped a bombshell. He wanted the plans by Monday.
Somerville, one weekend, came up with this initially crazy-looking idea of a pentagon-shaped building, 5 sides containing concentric rings. It's like a 5-sided donut with a hole in the middle. It turned out to be an incredibly efficient design, and in square footage, it was the world's largest office building for many years. And yet you could go from any one office to any other office in the entire building in less than 7 minutes' time, thanks to the 10 spokes that connected the 5 concentric rings.
The shape was chosen in part because it fit well with the existing road network at the proposed site. But concerns that the new building would obstruct the view of the nation's capital from Arlington National Cemetery caused President Roosevelt to ask for a new location. Construction on the Pentagon began September 11th, 1941, 60 years to the day before the 9/11 terrorist attack that nearly destroyed it. The project was rushed to completion in a period of about 16 months. Nearly twice the size of Chicago's Merchandise Mart, more than 3 times the floor space of the Empire State Building, the Pentagon today is an important icon for the nation and the state.
You can't have something that big, that powerful, and with that much money flowing through it not have an impact on a state like Virginia. And it did have a tremendous effect on shaping the history of Virginia in the last half of the 20th century and into the 21st century.
On September 11th, 2001, I was in London, and everyone spoke to me about the attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C., and I had to correct them that the attack was actually on Virginia, that the Pentagon was in Virginia, is in Virginia, not in Washington.
From 1607 to the 21st century, Virginia has shaped and influenced the American experience. It is indeed a place for history lovers.
There's Monticello in Charlottesville, the home of Thomas Jefferson. There's Mount Vernon in northern Virginia, the home of George Washington. There's Colonial Williamsburg, one of the first settlements in America. It's just unreal. Every 30 miles, there's another historic marker about something in American history that happened in Virginia.
Not to be outdone by Virginia, this next state calls itself the mother of modern presidents. No wonder. It's the birthplace of 7 heads of state, second most in the nation. Greetings from Ohio, which joined the Union March 1st, 1803, as the 17th state. It ranks 7th in population, with well over 11 million residents. From fields of corn to the most competitive football fields in the nation, perhaps no state offers a better snapshot of Middle America than the Buckeye State.
We talk about Ohio being the heart of it all, and I think in politics it certainly has been that way since it became a state in 1803.
Ohio became, from a very early point, a microcosm of the United States in its entirety. And so anyone who wanted to win an election really needed to have Ohio.
Ohio has done more than decide elections. It has provided the candidates. 7 U.S. presidents were born here. Harrison, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, McKinley, Taft, and Harding.
Almost always the ones that students never remember. They seem to get lost in history.
You have the fattest president in William Howard Taft, who allegedly got stuck in his own bathtub. You also, of course, have 2 of the most corrupt presidents in American history, between Grant and Harding. Historians, every single time they're polled, put them right down there at the bottom of the list.
More unfortunate still were Presidents Garfield and McKinley. Both were assassinated while in office. Maybe that's part of the reason Ohio's presidential roll call doesn't quite measure up to Virginia's.
I mean, Virginia has Washington, and they have Jefferson, they have Madison. And Ohio has Grant and Hayes and Harding and Taft. It's just really not a fair fight, unfortunately.
Ohio may be second in presidents, but it does have a number of notable firsts. The first professional baseball team was the Cincinnati Red Stockings in the 1860s. And the forerunner to the National Football League was created in Canton in 1920. Another Ohio first is more obscure, but just as important, at least for law enforcement.
The first motorized patrol wagon was here. It was back in the 1890s. It was electronic, and it ran 15 miles an hour top speed and had a big brass bell on the front, and that was the alarm, look out, here we come.
When it comes to firsts, however, it's hard to top this one, the invention of the airplane.
The Wright brothers, a lot of people think that they're from North Carolina. Well, actually, they're Ohioans, born and raised and had their bike shop.
The state just seems to have a special relationship with people reaching for the sky. Case in point, astronauts John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth in 1962, and Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon in 1969. Both come from Ohio.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And the ultimate high flyer, Superman, was the 1933 brainchild of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, a pair of high school buddies from Cleveland. Long before Ohio took to the air, lakes and rivers were its principal means of transport.
There's a date that sticks in my mind that I think is critical, and that is 1832, when a canal was completed between Cleveland on Lake Erie and Portsmouth on the Ohio River. And at that moment, the state of Ohio is in the middle of a route that connects the Gulf of Mexico to Europe. And that is one of the reasons Ohio rises to greatness. It is in the right place.
Ohio's strategic location, combined with bountiful natural resources and potential sources of power, made the state one of the preeminent manufacturing centers in America. Cleveland and Akron, located on the Cuyahoga River with easy access to Lake Erie, led the way. Oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller opened his first refinery in Cleveland in 1863. 8 years later, Benjamin Goodrich established his rubber factory in Akron. Other heavy industries like iron, steel, and coal also thrived, but at a price. In an era of little or no environmental regulation, untold tons of toxic industrial waste ended up in Ohio's waterways. By the 1960s, Lake Erie was virtually dead, and the Cuyahoga was horribly polluted.
The Cuyahoga River, which is the raison d'etre for the establishment of the city of Cleveland, became, during the city's period of industrialization, the sewer for the city.
On June 22nd, 1969, the river caught fire. Even though the blaze lasted just 30 minutes, the event captured the nation's attention.
Boy, when your river catches fire, just how polluted does that thing have to be?
Incredibly, this wasn't the first time the Cuyahoga had caught fire. Far from it, in fact.
The fire in 1912 killed 5 people. The fire in 1936 went on for 5 days. The fire in 1952 ended up costing 30 times the damage of the fire in 1969.
This event that just caught the public's consciousness, I think, jarred a lot of people into thinking that we have to do something about our environment.
Though few thought so at the time, the '69 Cuyahoga fire was something of a blessing in disguise, helping to spark a movement that led to the Clean Water Act of 1972 and the creation of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency.
And since '69, that river has been cleaned up. It's become a recreational avenue.
It's nice to know that one of Ohio's most popular recreational events produces no pollution at all, the annual Soapbox Derby.
It started in Dayton, Ohio, back in 1933, and a man named Myron Scott found 5 boys just racing little homemade cars down this hill.
The older cars were made out of anything from an ironing board to orange crates, whatever you could find. when you put a set of wheels on it and you race that.
Scott, a photographer for the Dayton Daily News, decided to organize a local race. It was the Great Depression, the summer of 1933, and 362 kids raced.
He was giving the second place prize out, which was a boy's bicycle. And he thought it was an all-boys event until this girl took off her hat for her boy's bicycle. Girls never raced again until 1971. But, you know, the runner-up in the very first race, Alice Johnson, got herself a bicycle.
Today, over 45% of the entrants are girls.
Okay, Matt. I think that girls are better at suplex derby racing than boys.
1, 2, 3.
Qualifying races are now held around the world, with the All-American Soapbox Derby taking place each summer in Akron.
To win your local, you have to win that to go to nationals, and I finally won, so that was amazing. I was crying for like an hour. I finally got to go to Akron.
Whether it's a case of using gravity or defying it, Ohio has emerged as an industrial and political giant in America. It more than lives up to its unofficial slogan, Ohio, the heart of it all. The concentration of eagles, hawks, falcons, and owls in this state is almost unparalleled. Many of them nest in the cliffs towering 700 feet above the majestic Snake River. Greetings from Idaho, the 43rd state to join the Union, which it did on July 3, 1890. With a population of 1.4 million, it's the 39th most populous state in the nation.
Well, I grew up in a really small mining town called Triumph in Idaho, so when I think back to my childhood and my favorite memories, it was the ultimate freedom. We just could roam, and we cruised, and we rode our bikes, and we hiked, and we cut down our own Christmas tree, and just living. And it was just raw living and freedom.
The drama and freedom of Idaho is found in its wilderness. The numbers tell the story. 30 state parks, 13 national forests, 93,000 miles of rivers and streams. It's no wonder that this state is a mecca for anglers and sportsmen from all around the country.
Some of the most spectacular and beautiful scenery in the Sawtooth and Lost River ranges and some of the places in Idaho that are just absolutely amazing places. And it's a place where you can go and hike for a few hours and find a place where you may not see another person for weeks at a time. You can find solitude in Idaho, and we like that.
Many anglers are lured to Idaho by the official state fish, the cutthroat trout, so named for a distinctive red slash on the underside of its lower jaw. The great fishing has helped boost the tourist industry. But for many years, the state's most important economic leaders were mining and agriculture.
Idaho is a divided state in many ways. Northern Idaho has a mining community development. Southern Idaho has an agricultural development, mostly from Mormon settlement, beginning in the 1870s.
As the numbers of Mormon pioneers in Utah's Salt Lake Valley area increased, some of them moved north to start a new farming community. Little did they know they were in Idaho, not Utah, and that what they were planting would become the state's most famous crop. Today, agriculture accounts for just 15% of the annual gross state product. But when people hear Idaho, they think potatoes. Production of this tuber ranks first in the nation. In fact, the world's largest baked potato may well be in Blackfoot, Idaho.
This is the biggest potato in Idaho. You probably wouldn't want to eat it. It's made of chicken wire and a whole bunch of stuffing inside.
An Idaho baked potato is the best thing I've ever eaten in my life.
Mashed with herbs and butter.
In a casserole with lots of cheese.
Just a little salt and pepper and butter, and I'm happy.
I like them most anyway.
French fries, fry sauce, cold beer. Takes up the whole afternoon.
If you like your potatoes cut up and fried, chances are you're eating Idaho russets. 2/3 of all U.S. processed potatoes are grown in Idaho soil. Not surprisingly, they're prepared and packaged here as well.
We have good soil. We have probably the best thing that we have is the ideal day-night temperature and summer temperature regime. The climate is ideal for potato production.
Botanist Luther Burbank developed his famous russet potato in New England. Eventually, it became a favorite Idahoan crop.
The Idaho russet is the best baking potato that there is. It's light and fluffy when you bake it and tastes real good.
And if you like French fries, thank Jack Simplot, who figured out how to cut and freeze large quantities of the popular item. Today, the J.R. Simplot Company is one of the world's largest frozen potato processors, annually turning out 3 billion pounds of French fries and other potato products.
J.R. Simplot was another pioneer in the potato industry. He started pulling together the shipping industry and putting together a more sophisticated system for delivering potatoes to the public. And he became, by about 1940, the largest shipper of potatoes out of Idaho.
Idaho Potato Campaign is one of the most popular and successful commodity advertising campaigns in history, rivaled really only by Wisconsin cheese.
But there's a lot more to Idaho than potatoes. Few know that Idaho's Shoshone Falls is called the Niagara of the West. Even fewer know that Shoshone is actually higher than those famous falls in New York. And if you're looking for the deepest gorge in America, don't look to the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Idaho's Hell's Canyon takes that prize. Idaho is also the home to Dick Fosbury, who revolutionized the high jump with the Fosbury flop. Many decades ago, the gold in the Olympic medal Fosbury won in 1968 could have come from Idaho. The famed 49ers, 20,000 strong, passed through the state on their way to California gold fields. 11 years later, many of them returned for Idaho's own gold rush.
In Idaho, the gold rush begins in the early 1860s.
Elias Pierce came up in 1860 in the Clearwater country and found gold along the creeks there and established a town named after him, Pierce, the oldest mining town in Idaho today.
Gold was just the start of it. Deep inside Idaho, rich mineral deposits of lead, copper, zinc, and silver were also discovered. Mining became the state's first major industry.
The nature of mining changes in Idaho drastically by the 1890s, as it does throughout the West. No longer is it dominated by small-scale prospectors who are just panning for gold. Now, in order to mine in a competitive Idaho mining industry, you need a lot of financial backing. You need large-scale equipment.
Once that movement ends, it's replaced by corporate. These are corporate companies that come in. They require a tremendous amount of infrastructure to get to this lead and silver. It requires taking out large chunks of the hillside.
Northern Idaho's aptly named Silver Valley has been a mining center since the mid-19th century. Today, the state is third to Alaska and Nevada in silver production. Above ground, the riches are just as plentiful and much easier to find.
The best thing about Idaho is, one, it's cool shape on the map, and kids can remember it, which I think is neat. Two, its location and its climate. The snow, obviously being a skier, I love the snow there. The winters are huge, the summers are warm. The seasons are dramatic. You know, you can feel that difference, and it's really intense. And you really feel like you're living and you're one with it all when you can feel it that much.
This state slogan, the Heart of Dixie, reflects a complex political and social history. Until the 1960s, racial segregation was the law of the land. But today, many of its citizens find unity in a mystical phenomenon known as the Crimson Tide. Greetings from Alabama, the 22nd state, admitted to the Union on December 14, 1819. With 4.6 million residents, Alabama is the 23rd most populous state.
The best thing about Alabama is the football team. Football.
Football at the University of Alabama and Auburn University is like a religion in this state, and Paul Bear Bryant, Alabama's legendary coach, is like a god. In the 1960s and 70s, Bryant led the Crimson Tide to 6 of their 12 national championships. Though football is king, Alabama has also produced some of America's greatest in other sports. Track star Jesse Owens, boxer Joe Louis, and baseball immortals like Willie Mays and Hammer and Hank Aaron. Then there's the music. In recent years, 3 Alabama native sons became big stars on American Idol. The success of winners Taylor Hicks and Reuben Studdard, along with finalist Bo Bice, prompted the state to put up billboards with the catchy phrase, "Where America finds its voice, Alabama."
People that have won it from Alabama, I think all of them are great. It's like the song, Stand Up for Alabama. And they made it, you know, each one of us has a way of standing up for Alabama, and that's the way they did it, through their music.
But not only, you know, singing, but, you know, recording. When you think about music, you think about in the 60s with the Muscle Shoals sound. Most every R&B, country, pop artists were recorded in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. A lot of people don't know that, but it's the truth.
The music boom came to Muscle Shoals in the late 1950s with the opening of Fame Recording Studio. A decade later, Fame's rhythm section broke away and created their own studio, Muscle Shoals Sound. The artists who have recorded in this tiny corner of Northwest Alabama include legends like Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, and Paul Simon.
All these people came to Muscle Shoals and recorded with the Muscle Shoals rhythm section and other musicians in Muscle Shoals. Our first hit record was with R.B. Greaves, called Take a Letter Maria. That led to a lot of other artists coming and recording with us, including the Rolling Stones, Linda Ronstadt. The list goes on and on. When you get a hit record, you want a hit record of your own, and so you go where they cut hit records.
Less than 5 miles from Muscle Shoals, the small town of Tuscumbia prides itself as the home of one of Alabama's most revered citizens, the woman who appears on the commemorative state quarter issued by the U.S. Mint in 2003. Helen Keller taught the world how much the handicapped can accomplish when given the opportunity. She was just 19 months old when a devastating illness left her blind and deaf. With the help of a dedicated teacher named Annie Sullivan, Helen learned to speak, read, and write. She even earned a college education. To get the full Alabama experience, just head for the great outdoors, where you'll find 10% of the nation's natural resources. In the early 20th century, abundant mineral deposits made Birmingham one of the leading steel producers in the country.
Alabama's the only state that has all the key ingredients to produce steel: coke, lime, and iron ore. That's why Birmingham became such a big steel producer in the 20th century.
Industry, technology, and innovation are all part of Alabama's legacy. The world's first citywide electric trolley system opened in Montgomery in 1886. One of America's first open-heart surgeries was performed there in 1902. And in the 1960s, NASA technicians in Huntsville built the rocket that finally put humans on the moon. Like many states, however, Alabama's rich history is marred by a dark underside. At his inaugural address in 1963, George Wallace, the state's new governor, issued a defiant declaration.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
It was a sentiment that harkened back to the Civil War. Alabama, the fourth state to leave the Union, was considered the birthplace of the Confederacy, with Montgomery becoming the first capital. But not all Alabamans believed the Southern cause was just.
Winston County, Walker County, some of the other counties are in the hill part of Alabama. Very few black persons live in those areas. They did not have slavery.
People in areas especially like Winston County, once we get to the eve of the Civil War, are much more unionist in their perspective than you would find in the fervency of dissolving the Union from the Black Belt planters in South Alabama.
These people said, we're not going to fight a rich man's war.
Their idea was, well, if Alabama has a right to secede from the Union, we should have a right to secede from Alabama.
Winston County's secession movement fell apart after its leader was arrested. In the end, at least 25,000 Alabamans died in the Civil War, more than a few of them fighting for the Union. In the decades following the war, Jim Crow laws became entrenched. By the mid-20th century, an increasing number of black Americans were actively resisting segregation. In Alabama, the agitation reached a critical juncture on December 1st, 1955. That day, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery City bus to a white passenger. The first capital of the Confederacy had just given birth to the Civil Rights Movement.
Rosa Parks was the third woman in 1955 to be arrested for violating segregation ordinances on Montgomery City buses. And the subsequent Montgomery bus boycott was participated in by upwards of 50,000 folks in Montgomery.
And it just so happened that a young minister comes to Montgomery to assume the pastorate of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and as he said himself, he just came here to finish his dissertation in a sleepy southern town.
We, the Negro citizens of Montgomery, have been involved in a nonviolent protest against the injustices which we have experienced on the buses for a number of years.
The guy's 26 years old when he's asked to lead this mass movement. I mean, he is a young man, but he is a powerful figure. He is a charismatic leader. He's inspiring to people.
And as a leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association, which really conducted the bus boycott, Martin Luther King became who he became as the civil rights leader.
The efforts of activists like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. paid off for Alabama, and indeed, the entire world. Today, "We dare defend our rights" is more than the state motto. It is a badge of honor.
To this day, I think my grandmother and a lot of her friends are still proud of the things that they did as far as the protests and the bus boycotts, because they had a part in changing history. You know, we're really proud of that legacy in Alabama.
When it comes to wealth, many people in this northern prairie state might not even realize how rich they are. The rising price of land that has been farmed and ranched for generations has created a number of unlikely millionaires. Greetings from North Dakota, which joined the Union on November 2nd, 1889. Its population is 637,000, the third lowest of any state in the Union. North Dakota may not have many people, but it is well populated with nicknames.
We call it the Sioux State, the Flickertail State, the Peace Garden State, and the Rough Rider State.
They were all picked at different times of our history. The Sioux, obviously, because of the Indian. The Flickertail is a gopher that lives in the state. The Peace Gardens is a park that's between Canada and North Dakota. And the Rough Rider, of course, is the Teddy Roosevelt group that went to Cuba to fight. That's where that name comes from.
Theodore Roosevelt often said that if it wasn't for his time here in North Dakota, he never would have been president.
Theodore Roosevelt first came to the Dakota Territory from New York in 1883.
He came out here as a young person, 24 years old, in search of excitement and wonderment. He certainly found that. He was also out here to hunt for bison. He'd read that the bison used to number in the millions in the northern plains. The time he got out here, they were in the tens of thousands.
T.R. quickly fell in love with the beauty and grandeur of the landscape. He became a passionate conservationist, due in large part to his time in the Dakotas. Years later, as president, he created America's national park system.
When he became president, it was his power to sign into law 5 national parks. Altogether, he set over 230 million acres aside for people to recreate for future generations.
Several years after Roosevelt came west, the Dakota Territory was split into North and South. Thus began a natural rivalry that only intensified when both were granted statehood on the same day in 1889.
President Benjamin Harrison signed the act that created North Dakota and South Dakota. He basically shuffled the bill so no one knows which state came to the Union first. N comes before S, so North Dakota's the 39th, South Dakota's the 40th state.
Score 1 for North Dakota.
I don't think there's a big rivalry. South Dakota knows we're better anyway.
3 attempts to drop the word North from the state name were defeated.
The legislators got together and decided that the name North Dakota had a connotation of cold and remote and so forth, so they were going to call the state Dakota. Whether or not that would have increased tourism, I'm unsure.
It's not going to change the weather. It's not going to change the economics of the region.
I think it's going to stay North Dakota.
North Dakota can brag about its lack of crime. According to FBI statistics, this was the safest state in the nation in 2004 and 2005.
Well, in North Dakota, you can see that people care for each other, they take care of each other, they keep an eye out. We're very lucky to be in such a safe state.
North Dakota is not only safe, it's named for the Sioux word meaning friend. How friendly? They say that even the governor has a personal listing in the phone book.
My hometown, I don't even know if the locks work on the vehicles or the homes anymore.
Usually we see somebody on the side of the road, we're going to stop, help them out.
If you love long, lonesome highways, you'll love North Dakota. It does have more registered vehicles than people, but that doesn't mean much in a state with fewer than 1 million residents. A road trip is a great way to see the spectacular terrain known as the Badlands.
The area is 400 square miles, beginning in the southwest corner of the state and extending north about 2/3 of the distance of the state. Very rugged topography, very rapid erosion. It's an interesting area, very colorful land.
The cool climate of North Dakota makes it ideal for spring wheat and cattle ranching. It is first in the nation in the production of barley, sunflower, and flaxseed. But the state's future may rest with its most plentiful resource, the wind.
We're putting quite a few wind generators in because North Dakota ranks as the windiest state in the United States in terms of sustained velocity of winds in certain areas.
We stand on the threshold of being one of the leading producers of wind power in the nation.
The same natural forces that provide hope for alternative energy also make North Dakota winters some of the harshest in America. It's hardly surprising, then, that this was among the last regions in the West to be settled. The early pioneers included many Scandinavians and Germans who emigrated to the territory in the mid-19th century looking for new opportunities.
The Norwegians come to North Dakota because the economy was so poor in Norway, and there was all the wide open land in the Dakotas.
North Dakota, by 1914, roughly 80% of the population is immigrant, or the sons and daughters of immigrants. 1/4 of the land in the state was owned by people of Norwegian ancestry.
The Scandinavian culture still has a strong presence in the area. Over 8,000 members of the Sons of Norway observe Norwegian Constitution Day on May 17th. As with every state, North Dakota strives to better itself while celebrating and preserving its heritage. In the words of Theodore Roosevelt, "I do not believe that any man can adequately appreciate the world of today unless he has some knowledge of, some feeling for, the history of the world of the past."